As soon as the messengers of death appeared, the lizard explained to the blog that these larvae eat the body of the dungeon victim, releasing life energy from the physical shell of the victim. As the messengers of death approached, Blog and the lizard began to twitch even more, but the trap was too dense and viscous. Meanwhile, Yuhan and his ghouls sat around the fire and ate the meat of huge chickens for dinner. Suddenly, one of the ghouls told Yuhan that Blog had not brought food supplies with him, and he wondered if Blog could survive long enough not to die of starvation. However, Yuhan was absolutely calm for Blog, since he believed that nature itself had awarded Blog with a unique feature. At first, the ghouls thought that Yuhan was saying that the Blog was simply born strong, but Yuhan himself meant another feature of the Blog. Yuhan told the ghouls that Blog had the most dull taste buds in the entire continent, but the ghouls could not understand what was so good about this feature. Yuhan then told the ghouls that due to the fact that Blog had dull taste buds, he was practically indiscriminate in his food, and because of this, Blog could eat almost anything. Meanwhile, the messengers of death tried to deprive Blog of the consciousness that he could easily be eaten. However, Blog decided to try to neutralize the messengers of death without the help of his power, trying to bite off their heads. Because of his peculiarity, Blog didn't care about the taste, and he ate the head of one of the larvae without any problems. At this moment, the larva with its head severed began to fall down, while the remaining larvae stopped and began to tremble in fear. The lizard looked at Blog and could not understand how it was possible to eat something like that so easily. At this moment, nutrients began to be absorbed in Blog's body, and Blog began to feel a surge of strength. Blog tried to get out of the trap again, and the lizard kept reminding Blog that he would not be able to get out of the trap. However, after a few seconds, Blog still managed to escape from the trap, which greatly shocked the lizard. At that moment, Blog began to descend, but he immediately grabbed onto the slime that was holding him. After Blog stopped falling, he looked at the rest of the maggots, and began to think about which maggot he would bite the head off this time. The next day, the ghouls began searching for Cork's lair, and at one point they began to wonder if there was any benefit to creating a dungeon. Then the old ghoul lord told the ghouls that the dungeon was a kind of system that accumulated vital forces. Also, the old ghoul lord said that if you create one dungeon, it will gradually begin to increase its range and the rate of draining vitality more effectively. In addition, the one who created the dungeon can be considered the rightful owner of the territories occupied by the dungeon, and the ghouls began to wonder why people never created their own dungeon. Then Count Huerto told the ghouls that in addition to creating the dungeon, they also need to provide for it, since the operation of the dungeon requires a lot of life force. Count Huerto also said that if, along with taxes, he demands that the people take away part of their life force, then the people will certainly rebel against him. Along with creating and maintaining a dungeon, protection is also required, which is very difficult to implement. Along the way, the ghouls noticed that this area had very high air humidity and an extremely unpleasant smell, which is why people do not live in this area. Then the ghouls tried to understand why it was necessary to create a dungeon in this particular area, and then said that there were several reasons for this. The first important factor in creating a dungeon was a small area, in order to reduce the risk of invasion of these lands as much as possible. The second factor in creating a dungeon is the other goals of its creation that the creator pursues. Meanwhile, Croc organized a party at which everyone, including him, did nothing but drink whiskey. Cork used his alcohol to lure new slaves, whom he called friends. This time, Cork was able to lure several friends to himself, among whom were not only people, but also various monsters, among which was the very monster who first threatened Cork with cruel reprisals. When this monster was sufficiently intoxicated with whiskey, Cork handed him the contract that Cork had drawn up together with the master of this monster. At first this monster could not say anything, after which one of the frogs tried to make this monster even more drunk. A couple of minutes later, Cork announced the end of the holiday, and he told his new friends to go to the factory to produce even more alcohol. In their intoxicated state, the monsters could not do anything against Cork, and then they obediently went to the Cork factory for the production of whiskey and other alcoholic beverages. However, soon one of the monsters began to show aggression, and he began to demand more whiskey. However, Cork had no intention of complying with the drunken monster's demands, and he promptly hit the monster with an empty whiskey bottle. Cork's blow to the monster was fatal, and Cork decided to send this monster to the vat. After this, Cork told his charges that they urgently needed to get the best ingredients for whiskey. After a couple of minutes, the frogs went to the surface and began to dig a deep and very long hole. While the frogs were digging a hole, Yuhan managed to arrive at the same place where the frogs were working. Yuhan came closer and closer to the frogs, but the frogs did not pay any attention to Yuhan. Soon Yuhan took a shovel from one of the frogs and began to show the frogs how to dig properly. At first, the frogs thought that Yuhan was one of Cork's friends, but they still wanted to find out from Yuhan who he was. Soon the frogs noticed how persistently Yuhan was digging, and then they decided that Yuhan was indeed one of the friends. Soon Yuhan stopped digging, and then he gave the shovel to one of the frogs and told them to continue working. At this moment, the frogs immediately continued their work, but now they were digging much more efficiently than before Yuhan arrived. Meanwhile, Yuhan stood next to the frogs and told them that they should feel muscle contraction while digging. Thanks to Yuhan's instructions, the frogs began to dig the hole even more efficiently. Yuhan also told the frogs to imagine themselves exercising and that the shovel was an extension of their forearms. The frogs started digging so hard that they soon began to sweat, despite the fact that biologically speaking, frogs do not have sweat glands, which means they cannot sweat. Soon the frogs threw their shovels to the ground and stopped digging, because they did not understand why they should obey Yuhan. At this moment, Yuhan only picked up the shovels from the ground and told the frogs that they should not throw the tools on the ground. Then Yuhan picked up the shovels from the ground and gave them to the frogs, hoping that they would continue digging. However, at this moment, the frogs realized that Yuhan was not a friend, since they initially thought that Yuhan was drunk. Yuhan didn't understand why the frogs started to get angry with him, since it seemed to him that they had become training friends. At this moment, the frogs were completely convinced that Yuhan was not a friend, and then they decided to attack Yuhan. However, the moment the frogs attacked Yuhan, the shovels immediately broke. At this moment, Yuhan was angry at the frogs, not because they were trying to attack him, but because they allowed themselves to point their work tools at others. The frogs were surprised at how easily the shovels broke, and they decided that the shovels only broke because they had been digging with them for so long. Also, one of the frogs said that if the shovels were a little stronger, then a weakling like Yuhan would immediately fall to the ground. Yuhan was very angry at what the frogs said about him being a weakling, and Yuhan immediately began to tense all his muscles. Soon Yuhan became several times larger, and he demanded that the frogs repeat what they had just said about him. First, Yuhan stood on the frogs with his feet, after which he grabbed their tongues. After that, Yuhan began to stretch the muscles, stretching the frogs' tongues as much as possible. Yuhan stretched the frogs' tongues so much that the frogs screamed so much that their screams could be heard several hundred meters away. Yuhan stretched in order to somewhat lengthen his muscles and apply even greater load. After a few seconds of stretching, the frogs began to apologize to Yuhan for calling him a weakling. Another frog was watching everything that was happening, and she decided to report to Cork what he had just seen. Meanwhile, Cork tried another whiskey that his assistants had prepared. Cork liked the whiskey so much that he believed it would be enough to create his own dungeon even without the help of an oculus. Then Cork decided that if he could soon create his own shelter, then he should call a squad of drunkards to his place and celebrate this significant event. Soon the VIPs arrived at Cork's office, and at that moment the rest of the frogs left Cork's office. These were representatives of the Order of Officers, whom Cork called drunkards. The werewolf named Cavid couldn't wait for them to start having fun, while the goat named Kill8 told Cavid that he was being extremely indecent. While the polar bear named Kalamak stood silently behind everyone, a man named Rendib said that he liked the scent of battle, while the fox named Tailcock spat to the side. As soon as all the representatives of the officer order had gathered, Cork used a special spell that turned all nearby areas into a field for a large board game. At this moment, Nijiro appeared, who was a four-sided dice and who was in charge of running the drinking game. Nijiro discovered approximately 380 creatures in the nearby area that could participate in the game, after which he created several clones of himself and headed towards these creatures. One of Nijiro's clones arrived to Yuhan, and he explained to him that he could become one of the 5 members of one team, while the rest of the members would play the role of supporting players. Nijiro also told Yuhan that if no one agreed to play, then all creatures would receive a special punishment that would increase their blood alcohol content by 0.1%. Yuhan did not know what blood alcohol concentration was, and he decided to find out about it in his magic reference book. From his magical reference book, Yuhan learned that alcohol itself has no direct effect on muscles. However, alcohol has a strong negative impact on nutrient absorption because alcohol is much easier to break down and process than proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Because of this, the load on the liver increases, as a result of which the liver requires more moisture, and because of this, the level of moisture in the muscles decreases noticeably. Yuhan didn't want his muscles to stop growing because of alcohol, so he decided to participate in the game. Meanwhile, another copy of Nijiro appeared next to one of the groups of ghouls, and one of the ghouls decided to try to participate in the game. However, Count Werdo was sure that this could turn out to be some kind of trap, and he decided that no one would put pressure on Nijiro. Count Werdo also suggested that they simply wait until someone else wants to take part in the game, while they simply watch the development of events. However, the ghoul was still going to press on Nijiro, but when Count Werdo tried to dissuade the ghoul from this, the Count himself accidentally attacked Nijiro. At this point, Nijiro announced that Count Werdo was now a participant in the games. At that moment, another clone appeared in the place where the old ghoul lord was now. Without thinking twice, the old ghoul lord decided to take part in the game, as he was worried that if he didn't want to participate, Yuhan would think that he was just sitting around. Also, one of Nijiro's clones ended up in the same place where Rain and Rin were now. Before taking part in the game, Rin decided to fully familiarize himself with all the rules and conditions of the game. After Rin read all the rules of the game, Rain and Rin decided to try to participate in the game too. After a couple of seconds, Nijiro created a new team, which included Yuhan, the old ghoul lord, Rain and Rin. Nijiro also created another team, the members of which were Quark and all representatives of the officer order, who would have to play against Yuhan's team. Before the game began, Nijiro turned around a few times to select the game that Yuhan's team and Quark's team would play today. As soon as Nijiro fell to the ground, the name of the game that Yuhan's team and Quark's team would be playing appeared on one of its sides. This game is called Bunny Bunny, and in this game the players become rabbits. However, one of the players in each team becomes a carrot. The goal of the game is that rabbits from one team must protect their team's carrots and try to capture the enemy team's carrots. If one team manages to capture the carrot, the other team will lose, and the blood alcohol content of the losing team will then increase by 0.1%. In addition to the main participants, secondary players can also play, helping any of the teams achieve victory. After explaining all the basic rules, Nijiro announced the start of the drinking games. At this point the players got their roles, and Quark got the role of the rabbit, which made him very happy. However, at this point, Quark noticed that some unknown player had been given the role of carrot, and he wanted to find out who that player was. At this moment, one of the frogs found one of the players on Yuhan's team, and this frog demanded to call for reinforcements as soon as possible. However, the second frog did not understand what was so dangerous in that direction, since 10 frogs had already been sent there, and he suspected that there were carrots in that direction. However, the first frog did not care who was on that side, as he believed that this player was too strong and they could not offer any resistance to him. At this moment, Yuhan was a rabbit, and he was heading towards the enemy carrot without any problems, running through all the obstacles in his path. Yuhan was afraid that if his team lost, the alcohol content in his body would increase, and he didn't want his muscles to stop growing because of alcohol. Meanwhile, the old ghoul lord was trying to escape from the frogs and get to the location of the enemy carrots. However, at this moment, the old ghoul lord was given the role of carrot, and he told all the other ghouls to protect him and prevent the enemy team from capturing him. Then the ghouls decided to use the call of the pectoral muscles to convey to all the other ghouls that the old ghoul lord had received the role of carrot, and that everyone should protect him. Meanwhile, a couple of ghouls were running away from the frogs along with Count Werdo. After some time, Count Werdo stopped and noticed that the frogs had stopped running after him. Then one of the ghouls told Count Werdo that one of the ghouls used the power of the pectoral call to notify all the ghouls that the old ghoul lord had received the role of carrot. The ghoul also told Count Werdo that the frogs found out that the old ghoul lord had become a carrot, and therefore all the frogs ran after him. At this moment, Count Werdo thought about how the frogs knew who the carrots were on their team and who they had to catch. Then the ghoul told Count Werdo that the old ghoul lord himself was shouting that he had received the status of a carrot. At this moment, Count Werdo became very worried and began to think that the old ghoul lord was simply crazy, since he so easily gave out such important information to the enemy. Meanwhile, the old ghoul lord and his group of ghouls were still trying to escape from the frogs. At that moment, Rendib was running along with the frogs behind the old ghoul lord, who was able to overtake all the frogs in a matter of seconds. The ghouls noticed how thin Rendib's nagas were, and they decided that they could easily stop him. Then the ghouls stopped, and crossed their legs to trip Rendib and stop him. However, Rendib jumped over the ghouls' legs without any problems and said that he could smell the slowness from them. The ghouls were amazed at Rendib's speed, and they already believed that they would no longer be able to stop him. At the same moment, one of the ghouls threw one of the dumbbells towards Rendib, while the old ghoul lord used his skill to reduce the weight of the dumbbell for greater range. Rendib thought that he could also easily dodge the dumbbell, and then he simply ran to the side. However, behind the flying dumbbell was Nair, who was already ready to attack Rendib. At that moment, when Nair attacked Rendib, Rendib managed to take out his sword and repel Nair's attack. Despite Rendib's reaction, the force of Nair's blow was much stronger, and she pushed Rendib high into the sky. At that moment, while Rendib was in the air, he summoned a magical beam from his sword, which flew towards the old ghoul lord. Meanwhile, Kavid was sitting in the cork cave and drinking another bottle of vodka. After Kavid drank another bottle of vodka, a strong flame burst out of his body, and Kavid himself was covered in fiery armor. The air around Kavid was so hot that all the nearby frogs jumped into the water to avoid being burned. Soon Kavid found himself on the ledge of one of the mountains, from which he saw the giant Yuhan. Kavid used special magic that gave him fiery armor, the strength of which depended on the strength of the alcohol Kavid drank. Before attacking Yuhan, Kavid drank a couple more bottles of vodka to increase the strength of his armor even more. A couple of seconds later, Kavid used the Young Moon Chariot skill, which significantly increased all of his stats. At that same second, Kavid used his skill to jump to Yuhan and defeat him. During the flight, Kavid promised Yuhan that he would kill him so quickly that he would not even have time to feel anything. At the same moment, Yuhan turned around and used a block fly to defeat Kavid. As soon as Yuhan opened his palms, the Kavid immediately lost consciousness and began to fall to the ground. As soon as Kavid fell to the ground, Nijiro reported that Kavid was out and could no longer participate in the game. Meanwhile, Tailcock was resting in one of Cork's rooms, and at one point she asked to bring her water. When Killate brought Tailcock a glass of water, Tailcock asked him if she had to participate in this game. Killate then told Tailcock that participation in the game was a requirement of the contract with Cork, and therefore they all had to take part in the game. After these words, Tailcock began to be capricious and say that she only wanted to drink and have fun. However, Killate told Tailcock that he could handle everything on his own, and that Tailcock wouldn't even have to interfere. At this moment, Ren was lying next to Tailcock's bed, pretending to be a plush toy. After the conversation, Killate asked Tailcock if she liked the plush toy he brought her. Tailcock told Killata that even though she really liked the toy, she was still very bored sitting in that room. After that, Tailcock got out of bed, took Rin and said that she would still like to hunt. Meanwhile, Rain was still trying to protect the old ghoul lord from enemy players. Soon Rendib landed on the ground and said that he could now smell the power. Rain thought Rendib was talking about her, and she told him that he really shouldn't have gotten involved with her. However, Rendib pointed back and said that he was talking about Cork, from which he smelled the power. At this point, Cork believed that since he had found the enemy carrot so quickly, he would easily win. However, the old lord decided to try to escape from Cork, and this began to make Cork very angry. While the old ghoul lord tried to escape, Rain decided to try to defeat Cork alone. Instead of trying to escape, Cork took out his bottle of whiskey and began to drink. A second later, Cork began screaming so loudly that he managed to break through the sound barrier with his scream. At this point, Rain covered her ears with her hands and curled up into a ball to reduce the damage from Cork's scream. Cork's scream turned out to be so powerful that Rain flew very far deep into the forest. When Rain began to land, she took her starting position and landed easily on her feet. However, as soon as Rain landed, she saw a defeated ghoul flying towards her. When Rain looked to the side, she saw Killate and Tailcock coming out of the ashes towards her. Tailcock told Killata that the enemy team's rabbits were so weak that she would soon get tired of this hunt. At this point, the ghoul told Rain that she had to be very careful, since Killate and Tailcock were very strong opponents. After this, the ghouls showed Rain Yuhan's body lying on the ground and said that it was Kill-8 and Talcock who defeated him. Rain was greatly amazed that someone had managed to defeat the invincible Yuhan. A second later, the Rain ran up to Yuhan's body and began to ask him about how Kill-8 and Talcock managed to defeat him, to which Yuhan said that he was just falling asleep. Rain was very indignant that Yuhan decided to sleep right during the battle, because initially he promised to help take revenge. Then Yuhan told Rian that he must definitely beware of something. Rian still didn't understand what Yuhan was talking about, and she wanted to find out from him what kind of magic or technique Kill-8 and Talcock managed to defeat him. Then Yuhan told Rian that human muscles do not grow during training, but during sleep. Yuhan also said that for stable muscle growth, a person must sleep 8 hours so that the muscles can recover normally and become larger and stronger. Yuhan also said that alcohol in the body negatively affects muscle growth, and he told Rain that he now hopes that Rain will definitely lead their team to victory. Rain realized that she should not expect help from Yuhan, and then she threw him to the ground and pressed his head to the ground. After Yuhan finally fell asleep, Rain prepared to look for the enemy team's carrots. While Talcock waited for Kill-8 to do something, Kill-8 took out his bottle of whiskey and immediately drank it. Kill-8's specialty was that the more alcohol he drank, the faster he became. Kill-8 threw his bottle on the ground and told Rain that she would pay with her life for spoiling Talcock's mood. At that same second, Kill-8 ran towards Rain so quickly that it was almost impossible to follow his movements. However, a few seconds later, Kill-8 ran in the other direction, crashing into a different location without causing any damage to Rain. At this point, Talcock began to get very angry at Kill-8 for so easily missing his chance for a successful attack. Then Kill-8 apologized to Talcock and told her that he did not know how to drink at all, and the more alcohol he drank, the higher his attack speed, but at the same time the likelihood of a successful attack also decreased. At that moment, Rain looked at Kill-8 and Talcock and thought about how great the difference was between them and the enemies that Rain had previously managed to fight. Then Kill-8 and Talcock began to chant in unison a spell that would activate Talcock's ability. After Kill-8 and Talcock cast the spell, Rain and the ghouls were surrounded by several clones of Kill-8. Kill-8's clones stood motionless, and then one of the ghouls decided to attack one of the clones. However, the moment the ghoul attacked one of the clones, that clone immediately disappeared. Ghoul could not understand whether he was able to somehow hit the Kill-8 clone or not, since he did not feel the touch of the Kill-8 clone. At the same moment, the real Kill-8 hit the ghoul with his horns, from which this ghoul was immediately defeated. Talcock, holding a glass of martini, told Rain and the ghouls that her ability was focused on creating clones. Talcock also said that the strength and range of her ability also depends on the amount of alcohol consumed. Talcock also said that even if she told them where the real Kill-8 was, Rain and the ghouls would still not be able to catch him, since by that moment the area of her magic would be too large. At that very moment, Rin decided that it was time for him to stop pretending to be a toy, and at that very second he attacked Talcock. Due to such a sudden attack, Talcock fell to the ground, and Rin began to attack her. Kill-8 couldn't believe that someone had managed to defeat Talcock, and he immediately ran towards Rin to attack him. However, Rain appeared in front of Kill-8 and decided to use a single leg stretch to take down Kill-8. Rain kicked Kill-8 as hard as she could and told him that people like him need to learn to breathe properly. Rain found out that Kill-8 turned out to be a rabbit, and Nijiro said that Kill-8 was no longer in the game. Nijiro also reported that the old ghoul lord also turned out to be a rabbit, and that he was also not participating in the game. Along with Kill-8 and the old ghoul lord, Talcock was also eliminated from the game, and Nijiro said that Talcock was the enemy team's carrot. After Yuhan's team won the drinking game, Nijiro gave the Cork team members a punishment of increased blood alcohol levels. At this moment, Count Werdo and several ghouls were able to run to the ledge of one of the mountains. Count Werdo also told the ghouls that he was, in fact, a carrot, and that the old ghoul lord had done a good job of diverting the attention of his opponents. Although the Cork team were defeated, Cork themselves were not at all disappointed. The forest in which the drinking games were held drew a lot of energy from all the creatures that were in the forest, and who also took part in the drinking games. Cork believed that all this energy he gained from drinking games would be more than enough to create his own dungeon. After this, Cork gathered all the magic into a single hole and began the process of forming a new dungeon. However, despite the abundance of energy received, Cork was never able to create a new dungeon. The ritual of creating a new dungeon was suddenly interrupted, and Cork could not understand what went wrong. Meanwhile, Blog was still in the cave, where he remembered what happened the day before he fell into this cave. Blog remembered his conversation with Yuhan, who drew his attention to the fact that Blog was very worried about something. Then Blog told Yuhan that he was tormented by doubts that he was still too weak. However, Yuhan did not understand why Blog considered himself weak, despite the fact that his muscles were now much larger. Blog told Yuhan that throughout his training, Yuhan taught Blog mostly only barbell training. Then Blog told Yuhan that before Blog could compete in strength, but now he is competing with Yuhan in technique. At this point, Yuhan jokingly told Blog that even though Blog was training a little less than Yuhan, he already wanted to fight him. After this, Yuhan told Blog that he was just joking, and that it was not at all that Blog had not yet reached his limit. Yuhan also told Blog to raise his hand parallel to the ground, since something was bothering Yuhan from the very beginning. As soon as Blog raised his hand, Yuhan asked him if he felt any pain or discomfort. Blog then told Yuhan that he did not feel any pain, but he did experience a somewhat unpleasant sensation. After that, Yuhan pressed his hand to Blog's back and asked him to raise his hand again. This time it was harder for Blog to raise his hand, causing Blog's hand to start shaking violently. Yuhan then told Blog that it was all because Blog didn't use the serratus muscles and he used other muscles instead. Raising the shoulders uses the serratus humeri, which rotates the humerus and trapezius, and Blog did not use the serratus muscles to lift the arm. Yuhan told Blog that he couldn't train his serratus muscles with a barbell, and Yuhan was ready to show Blog an exercise to train them. For this exercise, you need to take a training band, put it on both hands and extend your arms forward slightly wider than your shoulders. After this, you need to tense your arms so that you feel the tension of the elastic band and begin to move your shoulder blades. All you have to do is wait 5 seconds, after which you need to arch your back and at the same time begin to move your shoulders back. Yuhan gave Blog one of his training bands and told Blog that if he did 3 sets of 15 times for this exercise, Blog could easily tone up his serratus muscles. At this point, Kalamak arrived at the cave and told the Blog that Cork had told him to keep an eye on the cave. After that, Kalamak took out his bottle of wine, drank it, and said that under the influence of alcohol his body became much stronger and stronger. After a couple of seconds, Kalamak grabbed his head due to slight pain. However, after a few seconds, Kalamak stopped feeling the headache, and he immediately attacked Blog. At this point, the Blog thought that now he could find out how strong his serratus muscles had become. To find out how strong the serratus muscles had become, Blog decided to try throwing a stone at Kalamak to neutralize him. The force of Blog's throw was so strong that Kalamak's head began to bleed, causing Kalamak himself to lose consciousness. Kalamak could not move, and Blog decided to try to tear off Kalamak's head. Kalamak experienced very strong pain in the neck area, and he heard how loudly the vertebrae in his neck crunched. Meanwhile, the lizard that Blog had saved ran out of the frog's tent with the dungeon core in his hands. The lizard hoped that if he managed to get out of the frog cave alive, he could become the new owner of the new dungeon. However, the monster that was sent to Cork managed to sober up, and he immediately took the stolen core from the lizard. At first, the monster laughed at how easy it was for him to take the dungeon core from the lizard, after which he immediately flew away. When the monster flew away, the lizard decided that since he was unable to keep the core of the dungeon for himself, he should at least try to get out of this cave alive. Meanwhile, an army of ghouls tried to fight off the remaining Cork frogs. To fend off the frogs as effectively as possible, the ghouls lined up and took a defensive position. Every second there were more and more frogs, but the ghouls were confident that if their formation was not disrupted, they would easily fight off the enemy.
Para aumentar su nivel, los alienígenas comenzaron a matar a los ratains y en algún momento los alienígenas más fuertes se reunieron en.
Once Cork had finished his bottle of whiskey, he again used his amplified scream to break up the ghouls. Despite the force of Cork's scream, the ghouls continued to stand in place and fight off the crowd of frogs. Meanwhile, Rain began to fight against Rendib again, and Rain tried to figure out how she could try to neutralize Rendib. At this moment, Count Huerto took a large sword and tried to disarm Cork from behind. However, Count Huerto's attack was too much for Cork to expect, and he neutralized the Count without any difficulty. Count Huerto flew several tens of meters away from Cork, and he considered that his attack was indeed too loud, and therefore too predictable. Count Huerto also noticed that Yuhan was still sleeping, and even this battle could not wake him up. After a couple of seconds, Cork used his scream to overcome the sleeping Yuhan, But even from such a scream Yuhan did not wake up. Count Werdo looked at Yuhan, and did not understand how Yuhan managed to sleep so soundly that even Cork's cry could not wake him up. The ghouls were afraid that if Yuhan did not wake up, then sooner or later Cork and his frogs would be able to defeat them. However, by this moment, the ghouls heard the figure of a man emerge from the dusty curtain, who told the ghouls that he would definitely help them. It was Yuhan, and he told the ghouls that he had just finished pumping up the stylopharyngeal muscle, and that he could now join the fight. Cork looked at Yuhan and tried to understand what kind of bald monkey was walking towards him. At this moment, Yuhan walked even closer to Cork and prepared to use a one-arm press to defeat Cork. As soon as Yuhan hit Cork with all his strength, he began to throw his body up and catch him. While Yuhan was tossing Cork, one of the ghouls noticed that something was wrong with Yuhan's muscles. However, the second ghoul said that Yuhan's muscles were fine, after which he took a closer look and was amazed at what happened to Yuhan. All of Yuhan's muscles began to grow before his eyes, and veins and arteries began to strongly appear on many of the muscles. At this moment, Yuhan received several messages that the muscle growth process in his body was seriously disrupted. Because of this disorder, the muscles could grow almost without stopping, and due to their constant growth, Yuhan was unable to move normally. Soon, Yuhan's muscles became so large that they began to squeeze Yuhan's head. Soon, Yuhan turned into a giant muscle monster, with a mouth and eyes beginning to appear on his body. Cork looked at the muscle monster and thought that he had already experienced the same feeling that he was experiencing now. Even when Cork was a tadpole, he was faced with a feeling of hopelessness and complete powerlessness in the face of the emerging danger. Cork and Weirdo felt that they could not defeat the muscle monster, and then they decided to try to escape. However, at that very moment, the old ghoul lord appeared and he told Cork and Count Weirdo that they couldn't leave Yuhan like this. Also, the old ghoul lord said that they all feel powerless in front of the muscle monster, but if they abandon Yuhan, they risk dying. Cork felt that they really needed to do something, so he told all his frogs to gather. Cork also told the old ghoul lord that due to the current situation, they would have to join forces. The first thing the old ghoul lord did was tell the rest of the ghouls to try to surround the muscle monster. After this, Cork ordered his army of frogs to blind Yuhan, but the frogs did not even know where Yuhan's eyes were now. At this moment, the frogs were trying their best to stop the muscle monster and save Yuhan. In his past life, Yuhan trained at a fairly early age, and even then he was stronger than all his peers. One day, Yuhan managed to lift a barbell weighing 900 kilograms in the bench press. Yuhan was very pleased with his result, and he wanted to tell his coach about his achievement. However, when Yuhan came to his coach, he noticed that his coach could only bench press 100 kilograms, and he felt that his coach was very weak. After that, the coach put his barbell back in place and told Yuhan that it only looked like he was just lifting the barbell in the bench press. However, the coach told Yuhan that he bench pressed 100 kilograms using only the pectoralis minor muscles. The coach also told Yuhan that if he trained his muscles well, he would be able to better control his body. After which the coach suggested Yuhan try 100 kilograms. However, Yuhan told his coach that he was training purely for fun. Then the coach told Yuhan that even in this case, it's good that Yuhan is studying hard. Meanwhile, the muscle monster threw away all the ghouls and frogs that tried to stop him. However, despite unsuccessful attempts to stop the muscle monster, the ghouls and frogs still did not stop trying to neutralize the muscle monster. Each time the muscle monster moved more and more sharply, which is why with each movement more and more ghouls and frogs flew away from it. From the outside, this battle was very similar to the battle of one elephant against 1,000 ants, who never stopped trying to defeat a huge and strong elephant. At this point, Cork drank another bottle of whiskey and told the old ghoul lord that he could try to stop one of the muscle monster's legs. After this, Cork completely finished his bottle of whiskey and told the old ghoul lord that at this moment, he should try to stop the second leg of the muscle monster. However, the old ghoul lord told Cork that he could not stop the muscle monster's second leg, since he was not yet ready to become a suicide bomber. At that moment, the hand of the muscle monster began to reach out to Cork, and Cork believed that now he would definitely die. However, at the same second, Blog appeared and pushed away the muscle monster's hand, thanks to which Cork remained alive. At this point, the old ghoul lord said that now he could try to help Cork stop the muscle monster. Before helping Cork, the old ghoul lord told all the ghouls and frogs to hold on until they brought Yuhan back to his senses. One day, during regular classes at the gym, Yuhan wanted to take his phone, but he miscalculated his strength and accidentally broke it. At that moment, a trainer passed by Yuhan and told him that he could not learn to control his strength. Then the coach asked Yuhan how he felt in moments like this, when Yuhan could not contain his strength. After that, the coach took one of the dumbbells and told Yuhan that no matter how great his strength was, he must definitely learn to control it, and use it to benefit himself and those around him. The coach also told Yuhan that if he does not learn to control his strength, sooner or later it could lead to dire consequences. At that same second, the coach crushed the dumbbell with his bare hands and threw it on the floor. Afterwards, the trainer showed Yuhan how one of the broken dumbbell pieces pierced his finger, causing his finger to start bleeding. In the back of his mind, Yuhan thought about how he used to want to become the strongest in the world. Previously, Yuhan strived to ensure that his muscles were strong as steel. However, now Yuhan was not at all satisfied with the fact that now none of his muscles were listening to him. At this moment, Yuhan felt that he was a bad student of his trainer since he did not treat his muscles properly. Suddenly, Yuhan felt someone knocking on his muscles at a certain pace, and he believed that someone was trying to communicate with him using Morse code. At this moment, one of the ghouls used the call of the pectoral muscles to reach Yuhan. Then this ghoul decided to remind Yuhan of the very times when they had just started training with him. During training, not only Yuhan supported the ghouls, but the ghouls also tried to provide Yuhan with all possible support. Then this ghoul told Yuhan that he would like to have muscles as strong as Yuhan. This ghoul also told Yuhan that he was his role model, and he did his best to surprise Yuhan. At this point, the muscle monster began to slowly calm down, and then the rest of the ghouls also began to press themselves against the muscle monster and use the call of the pectoral muscles. Soon the ghouls began to tense their pectoral muscles even more, causing the muscle monster to gradually slow down. Very soon the muscle monster stopped, and he began to experience a very pleasant sensation. Suddenly, Blog noticed that the muscles of the muscle monster began to shake, and he thought that Yuhan could hear them. At this moment, the Blog realized that they should give Yuhan a massage as soon as possible in order to return Yuhan to his previous state. At this moment, Rin used one of his magic skills, which creates several sand golems. Soon, sand golems began to climb up Yuhan's legs and massage them. Meanwhile, Rain dealt light blows to Yuhan in order to give him a massage in those places that golems and ghouls could not reach. At that moment, the old ghoul lord asked Rendib if there were herbs anywhere nearby that could calm and put a person to sleep. Rendib said that in this forest there is a lot of aramara, the aroma of which has calming properties, after which Rendib immediately ran to collect the aramara. Meanwhile, the frogs began to massage Yuhan's feet and sing him a lullaby. While the frogs sang a lullaby, the muscle monster began to stagger, after which he sat down on the ground. After the muscle monster sat down on the ground, he began to scream loudly. Cork believed that the muscle monster was still aggressive towards them, and he ordered to attack the muscle monster, but Block said that everything was fine. Blog also said that this cry is more reminiscent of the sounds of a mother whale who is worried about her calves. In addition, the Blog believed that although this muscle monster's roar was very loud, this roar also clearly conveyed warmth and care. Soon the muscle monster stopped screaming, and then he began to yawn loudly and fall asleep. Soon, the muscle monster began to shrink, and soon Yuhan returned to his previous state. After Yuhan became himself again, he immediately fell to the ground and quickly began to fall asleep. The ghouls and frogs were very exhausted, and at that moment they also began to fall asleep right on the ground. The next morning, Rendib believed that now they could continue to fight against the ghouls again, and he suggested that Cork attack the ghouls. However, Cork was categorically against fighting ghouls, and then he simply told Rendib not to talk to him. This morning, Yuhan and the ghouls began training with Cork and all his assistants. Meanwhile, Ben was talking to Ryan, and he told her that a student like him does everything for a teacher like Ryan. Ben also told Ryan that he was glad that killing the Oculus had reduced all the risk factors. However, what was important to Ben at the moment was that Eliza was alive again, and now he could be with her again. Even though Eliza did indeed look the same, Ryan still worried that this might not be the same Eliza they knew before. However, Ben did not care at all, since all that was important to him was that now he could be together with Eliza again. At this point, Ryan said that it didn't matter anymore, and that now they needed to figure it out. Ryan considered that this Eliza should under no circumstances be left alive, and she decided to kill her as soon as possible. However, Ben could not allow his Eliza to die again, and he immediately tried to attack Ryan. At that moment, Ryan told Ben that because of his revenge, many innocent people had suffered and died. However, Ben told Ryan that even with all this, he was left with nothing, and that Ryan should not pretend that everything was his fault. At this point, Ben tried to attack Ryan, but Ryan used one of her moves to attack Ben back. At that moment, a lot of blood began to flow from Ben's hand, and Ryan told Ben that her only fault was that she did not stop Ben the day Eliza died. At this point, Ben used several of his syringes and told Ryan that it was her fault that she allowed Eliza to die. After this, Ben's hand grew even larger, and he prepared to attack Ryan. However, at this moment, Eliza stepped between Ben and Ryan to try to stop their fight. After that, Eliza told Benny and Ryan that they should be able to find a common language and be able to conduct a dialogue. Eliza first turned to Ben, calling him uncle and telling him that since Ryan was her student, and whom she constantly helped, then he should not behave so rudely to her. After this, Eliza called Ryan aunt and told her that she should not punish her student with a real sword. At this point, Ryan did not understand why Elise was addressing them like that, to which Ben said that despite the fact that Elise was resurrected, her memories never returned to her. At that moment, Ryan understood everything, and she immediately ran up to Eliza and grabbed her by the throat. Then Ryan said that Eliza's body became just a new shell for the dungeon. Eliza began to beg Ryan to let her go, but Ryan herself was not going to let Eliza go so easily. Ryan also said that if she left Eliza alive, it could end in a serious disaster for everyone. However, despite this, Ben did not want to lose Eliza again, and he began to ask Ryan for forgiveness. After this, Ben fell to his knees in front of Ryan and began to beg her to kill him instead of Eliza and leave Eliza alive. Ben also did not stop saying that in fact it was all his fault, and that it was because of him that innocent people died. However, Ryan insisted on killing Eliza, and she told Ben that he himself should understand that this was not the Eliza he once loved. At that moment, Ben realized that Ryan would want to kill Eliza anyway, and then he stuck one of his syringes into her. After the drug was in Ryan's body, she immediately fell to the ground unconscious. Meanwhile, Yuhan finished training with the frogs and Cork told Yuhan that he would never drink again, to which Yuhan said that he could drink occasionally. Then Cork told Yuhan that when they left, he would immediately have one drink with his assistants. However, Yuhan immediately had a terrifying and murderous look in his eyes, which made it clear that he did not want Cork to continue drinking. Looking at Yuhan's angry face, Cork said that he would exercise and stop drinking. After this, Yuhan smiled approvingly at Cork and said goodbye to him and his assistants. Soon Cork and his assistants headed to their lair, where Cork drank whiskey for an hour. After this, the old ghoul lord reported to Yuhan that he and Bejamos had agreed to meet at the alley mine. In response to this, Yuhan told the old ghoul lord that they should now devote more time to physical activity and watch their diet. Soon, Yuhan and his group arrived at the alley mines, where Yuhan told Bejamos that they had fulfilled her request, and now they came for the parallel bars for training. However, Bejamos said that despite the efforts of Yuhan and his group, she could not make parallel bars for training, since Bejamos simply did not have the materials suitable for this. Yuhan became very upset that he would not get his bars, and he just wanted to finish off Bejamos on the spot, but Count Huerto and Rain were able to tone down Yuhan's aggression. However, Bejamos told Yuhan that if she received the necessary materials, she would immediately make the necessary bars. Bejamos also told Yuhan that if he found her the materials she needed, she could make a beam that could withstand more than 100 tons of weight. Then Yuhan asked Count Huerto why no one in his county could make such parallel bars, to which the Count said that in his county there was simply no such technology to create such a simulator. At that moment, Bejamos told Yuhan that she would not only be able to make similar bars, but would also tell her where she could get the materials to create them. To create such strong beams, Bejamos needs ore such as hackle, which can be mined in new emerging lands. Also not far from the alley mines there was a new dungeon inhabited by very dangerous creatures. However, Yuhan said that he was not afraid of any monsters at all, and he believed that if there were hackle deposits in that dungeon, then he and his group would be ready to head there. Bejamos decided that this time she should send Rin along with Yuhan again, which Rin himself did not like very much. Before going after hackle, Count Huerto asked Bejamos to give him the opportunity to evaluate her products that she had made previously. This behavior of Count Huerto did not please Yuhan, as Yuhan believed that they should go for the material as soon as possible. However, Count Werdo told Yukon that if they did not take care of his protection, he would become a hindrance to the entire group. At this moment, Yuhan felt that Count Werdo really wouldn't be able to help the group in any way if the monsters attacked, and then Yuhan jokingly called the Count an amoeba. Soon Yuhan's group found themselves in one of Begimo's warehouses, where Begimos herself said that the armor she created had very little weight and very high strength. Begimos also told Yuhan and his group that one day a commander-in-chief approached her with a request to create armor for him, in which he later participated in the war with demons. Begimos also told Yuhan and his group that her armor and arrows were made of a special material, the name of which was classified. While Yuhan's group walked with Begimos through the warehouse, Rain drew attention to one of the warehouse compartments. There was a small pink dumbbell in this compartment, and Rain couldn't understand what such an inconspicuous thing as an ordinary dumbbell was doing here. Count Huerto saw the dumbbell and decided to try to lift it, and he held it in his hands without any problems and performed simple exercises. After that, Count Huerto handed over the pink dumbbell to Rain, and she also thought that this dumbbell was very light. Soon, Rain threw the pink dumbbell to the ground, and at that moment, Yuhan also wanted to try to lift it. Yuhan walked up to the dumbbell and prepared to lift it in the same way as strong men usually prepared to lift a heavy barbell. However, despite such a small size and weight of the pink dumbbell, Yuhan was still unable to lift the dumbbell. At that moment, Yuhan remembered a moment from childhood when his coach pumped up his next workout with exercises with a pink dumbbell. When Yuhan asked his trainer why he ended his workouts with this small and light dumbbell, the trainer asked Yuhan what he thought of when it came to bodybuilding. Yuhan then told the coach that the most important thing in bodybuilding is the strength of the bodybuilder, the size of his muscles and the purity of his skin. In response, the coach told Yuhan that there was something more important in bodybuilding. The coach told Yuhan that the important thing in bodybuilding is that a person can lift any weight without any restrictions or difficulties. At this moment, Yuhan continued his attempts to lift the small pink dumbbell. At this moment, Count Werdo and Rain looked at Yuhan from the side and could not understand why Yuhan could not lift the pink dumbbell. At that moment, Begimos believed that Yuhan was the same boy that Kang Dong-jun told her about. That was the name of Yuhan's trainer, and Yuhan was trying to figure out how Begimos knew his name. Then Begimos told Yuhan that they were colleagues, and that he constantly talked about saving the world. One day, Yuhana's coach told Begimos that there would be a person in this world who would find it very difficult to lift a pink dumbbell, and so he asked Begimos to keep this dumbbell with her. However, at that time, Begimos did not understand what the point was in keeping a small and light dumbbell that someone would not be able to lift. Yuhan's coach then said that anyone who lifts light weights as hard as heavy weights will be able to change this world for the better. Coach Yuhana also told Begimos that he knows one boy who will be able to change this world. Only at that moment did Begimos find out that the coach had a student, to which the coach himself said that he had spilled the beans. In response to this, Begimos told Coach Yuhana that she would never in her life be able to understand what the coach was thinking about. Suddenly, Begimos wondered if Yuhana's trainer was going to return back to his world. In response to this, Yuhan's trainer told Begimos that he was not going to return to his world, and he said that he wanted to conquer space. Meanwhile, Begimos started shouting at Yuhan that he must lift the pink dumbbell at any cost. Yuhan tried to use all his strength to finally lift the pink dumbbell. Suddenly Begimos told Yuhan that he must definitely surpass his teacher and show all his strength. At this moment, Yuhan tried to exert so much effort that the ground under his feet began to tremble. In the end, Yuhan still managed to lift the pink dumbbell and tear it off the ground. After that, Yuhan threw the pink dumbbell back to the ground, after which he himself fell to the ground. At this moment, Count Werdo took the pink dumbbell in his hands again and began to think about why it was so difficult for Yuhan to lift it. When Yuhan asked Begimos where his trainer had gone, Begimos only said that he handed her the dumbbell and immediately disappeared. Begimos also said that it seems to her that Yuhana's coach is currently training somewhere. Yuhan then wondered if the coach had left anything else before he left, so he asked Begimos about it. Begimos told Yuhan that Yuhan's trainer had indeed left something behind, but she felt that it might be too dangerous, to which Yuhan said that he still wanted to know what the trainer might have left behind. A couple of minutes later, Yuhan's group found themselves in one large room, where there were a lot of different simulators. Count Huerto looked at all these simulators and thought that it was these simulators that Yuhan asked him and Bejimos to make. Then Yuhan said that his coach often told him that the greater the danger, the more you can pump up your muscles. Before returning home, Yuhan decided to train a little in this makeshift gym, and Count Huerto felt that they would be stuck here for a long time. After extensive training, Yuhan and his group returned to the ghoul settlement. When Yuhan and his group returned, the guard ghouls greeted them, and the old ghoul lord noticed some changes in the settlement. Then one of the guard ghouls told the old ghoul lord that during their absence some changes had occurred in the settlement. It all started when Yukon defeated a giant rooster, and from then on there was a struggle for power between different species. At first, the ghouls successfully defended themselves from their enemies, but everything changed when the orc army started a war. At this point, the blog felt that the orc settlement could not lose to the orc army. Then one of the ghouls said that at first they actually managed to hold the line. However, the moment the orc lord entered the battle, the ghouls found it increasingly difficult to fight off their enemies. The old ghoul lord was somewhat frightened when the ghouls spoke about the ghoul lord, and he wondered what tribe of orcs attacked their settlement. Then the ghouls said that these orcs were from a tribe called the Red Palm, which greatly frightened the old ghoul lord. Even at birth, the old ghoul lord was very different from other ghouls. The old ghoul lord was one of the few who had magical abilities, and his ancestors decided that he would definitely become the new ghoul lord. Soon the old ghoul lord grew up and began to put his magical powers into practice. However, despite the strength of the old ghoul lord's magical abilities, at that time his magical abilities had no practical use, and he used them for fun. As a teenager, the old ghoul lord used his magic only to reduce the weight of the stones he threw and throw them as far as possible, and one day the old ghoul lord hit a boar with a stone. The boar immediately ran after the old ghoul lord, who was having a very hard time running far enough away from him. However, at one point, someone crashed into the boar and stopped it, saving the old ghoul lord. When the boar fell to the ground, the stranger noticed that the old ghoul lord also had magical abilities. The stranger told the old ghoul lord that he was an orc from the Red Palm tribe, and this was the only tribe whose inhabitants could all use magic. After this, the Red Palm orc hugged the old ghoul lord and told him that they were now friends. After that, the orc hit the old ghoul lord on the back with all his might, and since then this orc greeted the old ghoul lord every time. With these blows the orc struck fear into the old ghoul lord, and from then on the old ghoul lord promised to one day take revenge on this orc. However, over time, the old ghoul lord did not become strong enough to take revenge on the orc, and from then on he began to simply avoid him. At that moment, one of the ghouls blew into a huge pipe to warn the ghouls about the next enemy attack. Then the old ghoul lord told the ghouls that they must definitely engage in battle and fight them off. At this moment, the old ghoul lord says that for the first time in all these years he finally has the opportunity to take revenge on that orc. At this moment, a huge army of orcs was already advancing towards the ghoul settlement. This same orc who bothered the old ghoul lord as a child was the commander-in-chief of the orc army. Before the attack of the orc army, this orc ordered his soldiers to leave alive only those who voluntarily surrender. Suddenly the orcs noticed how large and heavy boulders began to fall on them from the sky, the weight of which the old ghoul lord reduced for a greater flight range. Soon the old ghoul lord returned the original weight of the boulders, and large boulders immediately began to fall on the orc army. While the army of orcs was temporarily neutralized, the blog, together with the army of ghouls, decided to attack the orcs. Meanwhile, the orc army was disoriented, and the blog believed that if the ghouls fought like real manmen, they would definitely win. At that moment, the old ghoul lord took the nearest stone in his hands and prepared to throw it straight at this orc. At that moment, the old ghoul lord noticed how this orc was trying to defeat one of his ghouls with his signature blow. The old ghoul lord couldn't bear to watch this and suddenly panicked. The old ghoul lord looked at this orc's hand and could not forget the very pain that his back had been experiencing for a long time. At this moment, the orc looked towards the old ghoul lord and believed that he had finally found the ghoul lord. At that same second, the orc jumped forward and prepared to hit the ghoul lord with his palm. However, instead of hitting the old ghoul lord's back, the orc hit Blog's back. Blog didn't like the fact that he was just hit with all his might on the back, and then he immediately hit the orc in the face. After Blog hit the orc believed that Blog was the same ghoul lord, and he decided that Blog was indeed very strong. When Blog asked the orc what he was talking about, the orc told Blog that he knew that a demon in human form had become the new ghoul lord. After this, The orc once again hit Blog on the back with his palm, which Blog himself did not like very much. Then Blog hit the orc in the face again and said that he was not a ghoul lord, but just one of Yuhan's disciples. While Blog was beating the orc, he told him that now the old ghoul lord would take care of him. At that moment, the orc saw the old ghoul lord and saw in him his old friend. The Blog was confident that the old ghoul lord could easily deal with the orc, and at this moment the orc slowly approached the old ghoul lord. The orc was so happy to see the old ghoul lord that he immediately prepared to greet him with a palm strike. A few hours earlier, Yuhan, along with Rain and Count Werdo, were doing pull-ups on the horizontal bars that Yuhan's trainer had left behind. At one point, Yuhan told Count Werdo that when they completed 100 more pull-ups, they could go down and return to the ghoul settlement. However, Count Werdo was very exhausted, and he told Yuhan that he could no longer continue to pull himself up. Count Werdo also asked Yuhan why the old ghoul lord never trains with them, while the rest of the ghouls train hard and become stronger. However, Yuhan immediately told Count Werdo that the old ghoul lord puts in a lot of effort during training. Then Yuhan decided to explain to Count Werdo how flexible the concept of training intensity is. The fact is that for some, Yuhan's warm-up can be as effective and energy-consuming as a whole workout. Yuhan also believed that the old ghoul lord himself did not realize how much his body had changed during his training. Yuhan also believed that thanks to their training, the body of the old ghoul lord had become much stronger and more resilient. Meanwhile, the old ghoul lord pushed away the hand of the orc who attacked him. After this, the old ghoul lord grabbed the orc's hand and told him that he was no longer such a weakling as he used to be. At the same moment, the old ghoul lord used his magic and told the orc that he was now the best wizard among all the ghouls. At that moment, the old lord used his magic so that part of the rock broke off from the mountain and began to fall down. A couple of seconds later, part of the rock fell directly on the orc's head, causing him to immediately lose consciousness. Meanwhile, the orcs tried their best to defeat the remaining ghouls, but they were too strong to inflict any damage on them. At this point, the ghouls decided that in order to establish peace in the alley mine, they must use the most effective methods to combat their enemies. One day, one of the ghouls felt that since huge chickens used to be the most powerful creatures in the alley mine, it would be ineffective to use them only as food. Then this ghoul proposed to tame these huge chickens and use them in battle to increase their fighting power. Soon the ghouls trained huge chickens and began using them in battle, thereby creating an army of chicken riders. Soon, several ghouls with huge chickens on their shoulders entered the battlefield, and the blog thought that it looked extremely ridiculous. At this moment, the ghouls raised their chickens up and prepared to attack with them like battle balls. After the ghouls came close enough to the enemy, they immediately began to swing huge chickens in different directions and neutralize the enemy army. Due to their high muscle density, the huge chickens did not feel any pain during the fight, and therefore the ghouls could hit them as hard as possible. While the ghouls were successfully neutralizing the orcs, the blog thought that the idea of using huge chickens as a fighting weapon was a good idea. Soon more ghouls entered the battlefield, and the old ghoul lord ordered them to attack the orcs along with the chicken riders. After a couple of seconds, all the ghouls picked up one huge chicken, thereby creating an even more powerful army of chicken riders. At this moment, the forces of the ghoul army greatly exceeded the forces of the orc army in all respects, leaving the orc army no chance of a successful invasion. Soon the ghouls began throwing huge chickens into the crowd of orcs, who immediately attacked the orc army while the ghouls prevented the orcs from escaping, and the old ghoul lord called this technique a beating tactic. Soon most of the orc army was defeated, and the ghouls soon decided that they had almost won this battle. However, at that moment Okrad appeared, the same orc who had been intimidating the old ghoul lord all his life. This time, Okrad used magic to increase the power and area of effect of his technique in order to neutralize all the ghouls with one blow. However, at this moment, the old ghoul lord decided to use his new magical gravity skill to stop Okrad and save the ghoul army. While the old ghoul lord was using gravity magic, a mysterious field appeared around Okrad, which interrupted his attack. After that, several weight plates gradually began to appear in the sky. After a couple of seconds, these pancakes created a kind of Tower of Babel, which immediately fell directly on Okrad. After using gravity magic, the old ghoul lord asked all the other ghouls not to tell Yuhan about his new ability. After a few seconds, Okrad regained consciousness, and he told the old ghoul lord that even if his army defeated all his fighters, it would not change anything. The old ghoul lord wanted to understand what Okrad meant, and Okrad realized that the old ghoul lord and his ghouls knew nothing. At this moment, the ghouls told their old lord that he should pump up his body, that his healthy spirit and mind were in a healthy body. At this point, Okrad told the old ghoul lord that he no longer wanted to quarrel with him and his tribe, after which he asked the old ghoul lord if he knew anything about the oculus. The old ghoul lord remembered that Rain had mentioned a certain oculus several times, and he asked Okrad who it was. Then Okrad began to tell the old ghoul lord that it was thanks to the oculi that his tribe of orcs received such enormous power. However, one day the oculi told Okrad that in order to continue to use their power, all residents of the orc tribe must necessarily give them 20% of their life force. Okrad wanted to refuse such conditions, but could not since the oculi held all the inhabitants of the orc tribe hostage, and Okrad had to agree to such conditions. At first Okrad agreed with the terms of the oculi, but now he began to closely monitor the oculi in order to one day take revenge on them. After that, Okrad wanted to tell the old ghoul lord what abilities the oculi had and what the peculiarity of their strength was. However, at that moment, someone used a water projectile, which flew through Okrad and killed him. Soon Blog noticed a mysterious silhouette on one of the ledges, from the direction of which a fatal projectile flew at Okrad. At this moment, Rum, who was one of the oculi, was standing on the ledge, and now he was screaming in severe pain, as his hands received severe burns after using the water projectile. At that moment, Rum's partner told Rum that she had to increase the temperature of the water projectile so that Okrad would have no chance of surviving. Ruma's partner also said that Okrad had already told the ghouls too many details, and apparently they would also have to get rid of the ghouls and their leader. After this, Rum told the ghouls and their old lord that he would leave them alive only if one of them told them where Yuhan was now. However, instead of responding, the ghouls prepared to use the boulders to try and get rid of Rum. At this moment, Rum believed that the ghouls really had a strong character, and he realized that he could not come to an agreement with them. During training, Rain told Yuhan that among the oculi there are those people with whom you need to be as careful as possible. However, when Yuhan wanted to find out from Rain who these people were, Rain was hanging on the feet of Count Werdo, and soon the Count found it very difficult to hold on to the crossbar. Soon Count Werdo could not withstand such a load and let go of the crossbar, which is why he, along with the Rain, immediately began to fall down. However, during the fall, Rain managed to grab one of the crossbars with her feet and save Count Werdo from imminent death. Meanwhile, Rum and his partner managed to neutralize the old ghoul lord and his army with strange slime. After that, Rum wanted to leave the battle site, but before that, he asked the old ghoul lord to tell Yuhan everything that happened here in great detail. However, Blog managed to escape from the battle site in time and escape, and then he decided to return to Yuhan and tell him everything he had just seen. Meanwhile, Yuhan was about to return to the ghoul settlement, and it was very difficult for him to leave this place. Then Bejimos told Yuhan that even though they had only known each other for a short time, she could not leave Yuhan empty-handed. At this point, Count Huerto believed that they could take with them some sets of armor and weapons, the power of which could not be compared to those used by his knights. However, instead, Yukon decided to take some of the sports equipment with him, which did not suit Count Huerto himself. Then Count Huerto decided to ask Yuhan why they should take all this heavy pile of metal with them if they could return here at any time. To explain his choice, Yuhan decided to first ask Count Huerto if he knew what football was. At this moment, Count Huerto couldn't believe that such an abnormal person like Yuhan, who was obsessed with constantly pumping up his muscles, knew something about football. When Yuhan learned that Count Huerto liked football, he asked him if he wanted to succeed in this sport. Then Yuhan told Count Huerto that there are opinions that in order to become a good football player, you must always keep your ball with you. Yuhan believed that this is due to the fact that a football player must have a good understanding of the shape, weight, volume and other parameters of the ball, due to which certain experience is accumulated. After that, Yuhan gave Count Huerto some pancakes for training, and Count Huerto asked Yuhan how these pancakes were related to football. In response to this, Yuhan told Count Huerto that there was also a round object here that the Count should keep with him at all times, and the Count considered Yuhan's words to be complete nonsense. Afterwards, Yuhan asked Rain and Rin if they wanted to be good at soccer, to which they both said that they didn't want to. After that, the happy Yuhan carried several heavy weight plates behind him, while Count Huerto struggled to drag a couple of such weight plates. Meanwhile, Ryan mercilessly exterminated the mercenaries who came after her. During the battle, the mercenaries believed that Ryan was not a person, but a monster, since an ordinary person could not fight so skillfully against a crowd of mercenaries. No matter how strong and large the mercenaries were, Ryan could get rid of any mercenary in a matter of seconds without any problems. Soon the mercenaries realized that now they could not defeat Ryan, and then one of the commanders-in-chief ordered all the mercenaries to retreat. At that moment, Ben came out and watched with pleasure as Ryan cut the corpses of the fallen mercenaries into small pieces. At this moment, Ben was glad that he could fight side by side with his teacher again, as he had before. The fact is that Ben's drug, which he introduced into Ryan's body, washed her mind, which is why Ryan became completely uncontrollable. Meanwhile, Yuhan was heading to the county with a lot of pancakes for training. Soon Count Werdo noticed that several people were walking in their direction. These people turned out to be mercenaries of the Order of Tuchula, and they asked Count Werdo to take revenge on the enemy for their fallen warriors. However, Count Werdo did not understand what had happened, and he ordered the mercenaries to tell him everything that happened to them. At this moment, Talal, who was the leader of the mercenaries of the Order of Tudel, appeared before Count Werdo. During the last zombie attack, the Order of Tudel lost a lot of mercenaries, and Taddle and several mercenaries wandered around in search of someone who could help take revenge on him. However, along the way, Taddle and his warriors came across Ben, who organized the attack on the county. At that moment, one of the mercenaries drew attention to Rain, who was somewhat similar to Ryan, which scared him very much. Then this mercenary said that it was the former General Ryan who was in cahoots with Ben, and she attacked the mercenaries and defeated most of the warriors. Rain listened to the mercenaries and could not believe that her own aunt attacked the county's warriors. Then Count Werdo considered that there was no way Ryan could have attacked the county soldiers, and he believed that some kind of misunderstanding had occurred. However, Yuhan did not understand what Taddle and Count Werdo were talking about, and the Count believed that if he did not explain anything to him, it would end badly for him. Then Count Werdo explained to Yukon that Ryan, who brought him to the county, began to commit crimes against her county, since she teamed up with Ben, who organized an attack on the county. At this moment, it was believed that Ryan would hardly increase her strength in order to rebel against her county. However, Ryan felt that all this could not be true, since such a skilled warrior as Ryan could not lose to such a monster as Ben. At that moment, Blog just managed to run to Yukon to tell him everything that happened in the Ghoul settlement. The Blog told Yuhan that there had been major changes in the Ghoul settlement, and if they did not intervene, the ghouls could suffer seriously. Meanwhile, Rum took all the ghouls, along with the old lord, prisoner and began to torture them by shooting hot water projectiles through their palms. Rum told the old ghoul lord that if he told him where Yuhan was now, then all his torment would end. However, the old ghoul lord insisted on not telling Rum anything, and he was confident that the other ghouls would not give away Yuhan's location either. At the same moment, one of the captured ghouls told Rum that they could easily endure all his torture. The ghouls had experienced a lot of pain during their training with Yuhan, and they were confident that this torture would not be any serious test for them. However, the Room was confident that sooner or later he would be able to talk to the ghouls and learn from them everything he needed about Yukon. At this point, some of the ghouls began to experience severe pain in all their muscles, causing many of them to begin to shake violently. Soon the pain became so unbearable that the ghouls could not contain their screams. At this moment, even Rum was surprised that the ghouls began to scream in pain, while he had not even done anything to them yet. Soon all the ghouls began to experience this hellish pain, and none of them could hold back their screams. Due to the fact that these ghouls did not exercise for several hours, their muscles began to decrease greatly. Meanwhile, Yuhan wanted to know from Blog what he wanted to tell him. The Blog told Yuhan that the old ghoul lord told him to find Yuhan in case things didn't go according to plan. By that time, Rum had already defeated the orc army, and the old ghoul lord believed that the ghoul army had a very low chance of victory. The Blog listened to the old ghoul lord and did not understand what kind of strength you need to have in order to defeat an entire army of orcs so easily. Then the Blog wanted to find out from the old ghoul lord what happened at that moment when they tried to attack Rum. Then the old ghoul lord told the Blog that Rum used his skills in water magic, thanks to which he easily repelled all the attacks of the ghoul army. Also, the old ghoul lord noticed that Rum was with a partner, who probably enhanced Rum's magic. At this moment, the old ghoul lord was afraid that Rum and his partner might be on the same level as Yuhan in terms of strength. Then the blog thought that if Rum was so strong, then it would definitely need Yuhan's help to defeat Rum and his partner. However, the old ghoul lord told Blog that he should never bring Yuhan here. The old ghoul lord was afraid that even though Yuhan was very strong, the Rum and his partner could defeat him. Also, the old ghoul lord noted that at the moment, Ruma and his partner are only interested in Yuhan, and therefore they are unlikely to kill ghouls. Therefore, the old ghoul lord told Blog that he should bring Yuhan here only at the moment when Yuhan became strong enough to defeat Ran and his partner. Back then, the old ghoul lord believed that Yuhan was still not strong enough to fight Rune and his partner, and therefore they should not be risked under any circumstances. At this point, Blog told the old ghoul lord that he could try to help the ghoul army defeat Rum instead of running away. However, the ghouls told Blog that he should go after Yuhan since the ghouls believed that senior bodybuilders should protect junior bodybuilders. Blog also told Yuhan that, among other things, he would like to train a little with Yuhan again. Yuhan listened to Blog and told him that now he will train even harder to save the old ghoul lord and the ghoul army. At this point, Tattle said that he gathered all his remaining mercenaries to seek help. After this, Tattle and his mercenaries also began to carry his training pancakes with Yuhan. At this moment, Tattle was worried that if they could not find help in time, then all the mercenaries would be in grave danger. Meanwhile, Rin used his magic to summon sand golems to scout. At this moment, Rain considered that the first point in their plan was to find the entrance to the desired dungeon. Count Huerto then told Rain that they must understand that any dungeon owner will fight where they have a tactical advantage. However, Count Huerto believed that they did not need to try to take over the dungeon, and they only needed to find Hackle, which they should bring to Bejimos. While Yuhan's group was trying to find the dungeon, Tattle wanted to find out from Count Huerto how they would take revenge on Ryan. Yuhan said that first he should give Ryan a good scolding for what she did so that she would never do it again. At this moment, Count Huerto seriously thought about why Ryan suddenly decided to betray the county and take Ben's side. Then Rain told Count Huerto that she knew her aunt very well, and she could say for sure that Ryan would not betray the county. At that moment, Rin said that the signal from one of his golems in the southwest suddenly stopped. Rin thought that this was a very bad sign, and he said that they should definitely go after the missing golem and find out what happened there. A few seconds later, Rin said that he had also lost contact with another golem in the northwest. Count Weirdo believed that it was the powers of the dungeon that were incapacitating the golems, and he felt that they were not strong enough for the powers of the dungeon. In response to this, Rin told Count Huerto that golems summoned by higher beings have a maximum level and therefore are not so easy to defeat. Rin also noticed that all of his golems were neutralized before they had time to register anything. At this moment, Rain looked down on the surrounding area and thought that she did not see a single enemy. Then Rin suggested using one of his skills, which could change his location to the location of any other object. A couple of seconds later, a small stone appeared in the place where Rin was sitting. Meanwhile, Rin found himself next to an enraged Bidorman, who was ready to tear Rin into small pieces. Meanwhile, Yuhan suggested that his team do a little warm-up and do some arm exercises. However, Count Huerto insisted on not training in enemy territory, as he believed that training would only tire them out. Then Blog told Count Huerto that even if they did a lot of arm exercises, their legs would not be tired, and therefore they could easily continue on their way even after training. Yuhan confirmed the words of the Blog, and at that moment Count Huerto felt that in any case he would have to do these exercises together with all the group members. The first thing Yuhan wanted to do was hold an overhead extension, which works the triceps well. Before you begin this exercise, you need to take some kind of weight with both hands and lift it above your head. After the person has taken the load in his hands, he needs to bend his elbows and begin to slowly and carefully lower the load behind his head. Next, you need to straighten your arms using the triceps muscles, after which you need to repeat these movements in 3 sets of 20 times. During this exercise, you need to make sure that your elbows do not straighten out to the sides to avoid injury. Meanwhile, Rain decided to scout the nearby area alone to find potential enemies. At this moment, Rain was thinking that even if her aunt really attacked the mercenaries of the Tuchula Order, she still would not allow Ben to tarnish the reputation of her family. While Rain was exploring the area, someone was going to attack her from behind. Meanwhile, Tattle felt a strong vibration occur from the direction in which rain was heading. At this moment, Yuhan also felt a small earthquake occur not far from here. At this point, Yuhan told the blog that they must understand what caused such strong tremors. The blog felt that the warm-up he had done with Yuhan would be more than enough, and he was confident that if there were enemies on the other side, they would easily deal with them. Before going on reconnaissance, Yuhan told Tuttle and his mercenaries that until they returned, the mercenaries should continue to train. After that, Yuhan and Blog headed towards the tremors together to find out the reason for their occurrence. Meanwhile, Ben was walking through the forest with Eliza, and suddenly something caught Eliza's attention. Eliza looked at the flower and asked Ben what the item was, to which Ben told Eliza that it was a flower. Suddenly Eliza heard a soft rustling of branches, pointed at the squirrel and asked Ben what it was, and Ben told Eliza that it was a squirrel. Soon Eliza started pointing at everything and asking Ben what it was, and every time Ben answered Eliza's every question. At this moment Ben could not come to terms with the fact that Eliza had lost all her memories from her past life. Eliza then told Ben with sadness in her voice that she really couldn't remember anything she knew before she was killed. Eliza also looked at Ben and told him that he spends a lot of energy taking care of her, and she wondered why Ben was so protective of her. Then Ben told Eliza that the number of people who want to kill them is getting bigger and bigger. Ben also told Eliza that if he died, she should under no circumstances leave this safe place. At that moment, Ben remembered how recently he once again came to Rum for help. That day, Rum told Ben that he and his head were very interested in the research that Ben was currently conducting. Rum believed that if the living underground contained a large amount of energy, then they could use it as a battery, but Ben said that it was much more complicated. However, Room told Ben that he did not care how difficult it all was, since it was important for him to complete one global process, which should involve a living dungeon. At that moment, Eliza noticed how scared Ben's face was, and she believed that Ben was worried about something very serious. Ben responded by telling Eliza that everything was fine and that he was just a little tired. In reality, deep down, Ben was afraid of losing Eliza again, and he wanted to do everything possible to prevent this from happening. However, Eliza noticed that Ben had a very sad expression on his face, and she assumed that it was all because of her. Then Eliza put her hand on Ben's face and said that everything would be okay. Eliza also told Ben that as long as they were together there was no threat to them. These actions actually made Ben feel a little better, and he thanked Eliza for her sincere support. At this moment, Yuhan and Blog managed to arrive to where Ben and Eliza were, and at this moment, they immediately began to laugh and joke about Ben. Ben thought that Yuhan wanted to fight him again, so he told Eliza to run away from here as quickly as possible. Yuhan noticed how Ben was against him and Blog, and Yuhan decided that Ben wanted to cause trouble for them again. At this moment, Ben had already used one of his syringes, and he tried to attack Yuhan. However, Yuhan was able to interrupt Ben's attack, and then Yuhan believed that Ben wanted to demonstrate his strength again. However, Blog told Yuhan that he felt like Ben didn't want to fight right now. Yuhan told Blog that he couldn't believe that Blog came up with such a naive and simple idea so easily. While Yuhan was distracted by Bloga, Ben wanted to use a few more syringes to gain enough power to defeat Yuhan. However, at this moment, Yuhan was already preparing to use an extended pull so that Ben could not strengthen himself with his drugs. Yuhan then grabbed both of Ben's arms and used an extra press to try to pin Ben as hard as possible to the ground and disable him. While Yuhan held Ben, he wanted to find out from him what he wants and what he is trying to achieve. At this moment, Ben's drug stopped working, causing his arm to begin to rapidly shrink. Eliza believed that Ben was in danger, and she began to accumulate a large cloud of energy with which she wanted to try to defeat Yuhan and save Ben. However, Ben did not want Eliza to use her magic, and he asked her not to do so. The blog told Yuhan that the attack that Eliza was about to use looked many times more dangerous than the attacks of any sword master. Then Eliza said that she did not use her strength to intimidate anyone, since she believed that she was very strong indeed. However, Ben told Eliza that he was fine and that he had no intention of fighting Yuhan. In response to this, Eliza began to accumulate even more energy, hoping that in this way she could protect Ben. Eliza also told Ben that despite the fact that she does not remember all the events that happened to her before, now she felt good with Ben, and she did not want to interrupt this wonderful moment. However, Ben was most worried about the fact that if Eliza used her power, she could die. When Ben came to Rum, Rum asked Ben what would happen to the living dungeon if he spent all his accumulated energy. Ben then had a theory that when a living dungeon loses all its energy, it stops functioning, causing the dungeon to die. Eliza used most of her life force to create a powerful energy projectile that she wanted to use against Yuhan. Ben was afraid that if Eliza really used her life energy, she might actually die. Meanwhile, Bidorman was about to attack Ren, who suddenly appeared in front of him. At this moment, Ren was trying to use one of his skills as quickly as possible to defend against Bidorman's attack. At the same moment, a large stone appeared in Bidorman's mouth, which was supposed to hold him back for a while. While Ren was trying to run away as far as possible, Bidorman was able to bite through the stone in his mouth and rush after Ren. Then Ren decided to try to summon a large stone wall, which was supposed to protect him from Bidorman for a short time. After a couple of seconds, Ren was surrounded by his own stone wall, and he began to think in detail about his tactics for escaping from Bidorman. However, at this moment, Bidorman used his bone hurricane, with which Bidorman could easily overcome the stone wall. Ren realized that he had no way to escape from Bidorman yet, so he used one of his spells, which uses small stones as powerful projectiles. In response to such an attack, Bidorman summoned several more bone hurricanes, which absorbed all of Ren's stone projectiles. Soon, Bidorman's bone hurricanes were able to tear down Ren's stone wall, leaving Ren with no choice but to try to escape. However, Ren was too slow to escape Bidorman in time, and Bidorman eventually managed to catch Ren. At first, Bidorman tried to bite through Ren's head for several seconds, after which he immediately threw Ren high into the sky. In order not to receive much damage from falling, Ren used the skill of an underground swimmer, thanks to which Ren could stay underground for a long time and move as if underwater. Ren believed that now Bidorman would definitely not be able to catch him, and then he began to swim deeper and deeper into the ground. However, thanks to his particularly keen sense of smell, Bidorman knew exactly where Ren was now, and he immediately began digging the ground in the same place where Ren landed. Ren could not understand how Bidorman managed to find it so easily, and then he began to dig even faster. At that moment, someone wanted to attack Rain, and then Rain prepared to repel the enemy's attack. Rain began to spin her sword in a circle with the blade facing up to try and deflect the attack. It was Ryan who tried to attack Rain, and Rain found it very difficult to fight with her aunt, who wielded a sword several times larger. At this point, Rain began to beg her aunt to come to her senses and stop following Ben's instructions. At that moment, Ryan remembered how, as a child, she watched her aunt train. Suddenly one of the Count's ambassadors came and told Ryan that Ryan was very busy now, and therefore she could not continue playing with her niece. So that little Rain would not be sad and lonely, Ryan invited Rain to go train with her. Little Rain was very happy that she would be able to train with her aunt, and she happily went with her to train. Before the training began, Little Rain promised her aunt that now she would train hard and tirelessly with her every day in order to one day become the best warrior in the county. At the first lesson, Ryan decided to tell Little Rain about the sword and its structure. Ryan showed Rain how to hold a sword correctly so that it could not only attack your opponent, but also protect itself from his blows using the crossguard of the sword. Ryan also told Rain that during a battle she must correctly assess how strong her enemy might be in order to use the most appropriate tactics in battle. That day, Ryan told Rain that if her enemy was stronger than her, then she needed to use the flexibility of her body and reflect the enemy's attacks in order to defeat him sooner or later. During the battle against her aunt, Ryan felt that this tactic would have worked in a normal fight, but Ryan was many times faster than her, which made the battle much more difficult. Ryan soon used one of her skills, which creates a strong shock wave when hitting the ground with her sword, but Rain managed to defend herself from the attack with a normal high jump. However, at that same second, several hundred energy swords appeared in the air, each of which was aimed at Rain. After a couple of seconds, Rain activated her second combat skill, and energy swords immediately flew towards Rain. However, despite such a large number of energy swords, Rain believed that in any enemy technique there was some kind of weak point that could be used to her advantage against the enemy. To avoid damage from energy swords, the Rain began to rotate around its axis to minimize the likelihood of being attacked by swords. Soon, Rain flew past all the energy swords, after which she curled into a ball, putting her sword out. After this, Rain began to fall directly above her aunt, pointing her sword at her. At that moment, Ryan took out her sword again and prepared to repel her niece's attack. A second later, large and powerful clots of energy began to fly away from Rain and Ryan, with which Rain and Ryan tried to stop each other. A moment later, clots of energy Rain and Ryan collided at one point, forming a strong shock pulse that demolished everything within a radius of several tens of meters from the collision site. After being hit by two clots of combat energy, Rain fell to the ground in front of her aunt, and Ryan was already preparing to defeat her niece once and for all. As Ryan prepared to pierce her niece's body with her sword, Rain told her aunt that she was still not a good enough warrior, and that she still needed the guidance of her teacher. After these words, Ryan did not kill her niece, and a second later she simply disappeared. There was also a small wooden figurine of a sword lying on the ground next to Rain, and Ryan's voice told Rain that this figurine had always been with her. On the first day of her training with her aunt, Rain gave Ryan a wooden figurine of a sword that she had made herself, and Ryan promised her that she would keep and take care of this figurine.